The prayer book trembled in her hands as she knelt alone in the small wooden chapel, her tears falling onto the worn pages while she begged God for deliverance from a marriage contract that would destroy her soul. Susannah Norton had arrived in Tucumcari, New Mexico, 3 weeks ago, accompanying her Uncle Edmund and Aunt Constance on their journey west to establish a trading post. The year was 1878, and the desert town was still raw and untamed, a collection of adobe buildings and weathered wooden structures scattered across the dusty landscape. She had hoped the change of scenery might offer her a fresh start after her parents' deaths the previous winter, but instead, she found herself trapped in circumstances far worse than mere grief. Her uncle had wasted no time in arranging her future without consultation. Gerald Pemberton, a wealthy businessman from St. Louis who had invested in several mining operations throughout the territory, had taken an interest in securing a young wife. At 42 years old, he was more than twice Susannah's age of 21, and the cold calculation in his eyes when he looked at her made her stomach turn. But Uncle Edmund saw only the generous sum Pemberton was willing to pay for the privilege of marriage, and Aunt Constance had made it clear that Susannah's personal feelings were irrelevant. The wedding was scheduled for 2 days hence, and Susannah had nowhere to run. She had no money, no family who would take her in, and no skills that would allow her to support herself in this harsh frontier town. So she came to the chapel each morning before dawn, pouring her heart out to the only one who might hear her desperate pleas. She did not hear the heavy wooden door open behind her, nor the soft footfalls approaching down the narrow aisle. She was too lost in her prayers, her voice barely a whisper as she spoke words of desperation and hope. It was not until she sensed a presence beside her that she looked up, startled to find a man kneeling on the rough wooden floor not 3 feet away. He was unlike anyone she had ever seen. His shoulders were impossibly broad beneath a worn leather vest, his arms thick with muscle visible through the rolled sleeves of his faded shirt. Dark hair fell past his collar, and a thick beard covered his jaw. But it was his eyes that captured her attention, a clear gray that held unexpected gentleness despite the rugged, intimidating exterior. He had to be well over 6 feet tall, his frame powerful and solid, the kind of man who looked as though he could wrestle a bear and win. "Did not mean to frighten you," he said quietly, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to resonate through the small space. "I heard someone crying. Wanted to make sure you were all right." Susannah quickly wiped at her tears, embarrassed to have been caught in such a vulnerable moment. "I am fine. Thank you for your concern." He studied her for a long moment, those gray eyes seeing far too much. "Begging your pardon, miss, but you do not look fine. You look like someone carrying the weight of the world." Something about his directness, combined with the genuine concern in his voice, broke through her careful composure. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I was praying for a miracle." "What kind of miracle?" He shifted his weight, settling more comfortably on the floor as though prepared to listen for as long as necessary. She should not confide in a stranger. It was improper, dangerous even. But desperation made her reckless. "I am being forced to marry a man I do not love, a man I fear. The wedding is in 2 days, and I have no way to escape it." The mountain man's expression darkened. "Forced how?" "My uncle arranged it. He controls my inheritance from my parents, meager though it is. He says if I refuse this marriage, he will cast me out without a penny. I have no other family, no means to support myself." The words tumbled out in a rush as though speaking them aloud might somehow make the situation more bearable. "So you came here to pray for deliverance?" "It was not a question. I came here to pray for anything. A miracle, an escape. The courage to face what is coming. I do not even know what I was asking for anymore." She looked down at her hands, still clutching the prayer book. "I suppose I sound foolish." "No," he said firmly. "You sound like someone in trouble who needs help." She met his eyes again, surprised by the conviction in his voice. "You do not even know me." "No, but I know what it is to feel trapped, and I know that no woman should be sold off like cattle to the highest bidder." He extended one large, calloused hand toward her. "Name's Knox Winston. I live up in the mountains, trap and hunt mostly, bring pelts and meat down to trade every few weeks. Been coming to Tucumcari for near about 5 years now." She hesitated only a moment before placing her much smaller hand in his. The warmth and strength of his grip was oddly reassuring. "Susannah Norton." "Well, Miss Norton, seems to me that maybe your prayer just got answered." Knox released her hand and sat back on his heels. "You need a way out of this marriage." Hope flared in her chest, bright and painful. "What are you suggesting? Marry me instead." The words hung in the air between them, so unexpected that Susannah could only stare at him in shock. "You cannot be serious." "I am serious as the grave." Knox's expression remained calm and steady. "You need a husband to avoid being forced into a marriage you do not want." "I have been thinking lately that a wife might not be such a bad thing. We could help each other." "But you do not know anything about me. I could be terrible. I could be lazy or cruel or completely unsuited to frontier life." Even as she protested, part of her mind was racing ahead, considering the possibility. "Could be," he acknowledged. "But something tells me you are not any of those things. You are here praying instead of scheming or plotting revenge. That says something about your character." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I will not lie to you, Miss Norton. Life in the mountains is hard. My cabin is small and simple. Winters are cold and the work is constant. But I can promise you this. I will never force you to do anything against your will. I will protect you with my life, and I will treat you with respect." "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Susannah asked, needing to understand his motives. Knox was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. 5 years ago, I watched my sister marry a man she did not love because my father insisted on it. She was miserable. He was cruel to her in ways that did not leave visible marks. She died in childbirth 2 years later, and I always wondered if she had just given up fighting because she had no fight left in her. His jaw tightened. "I swore then that if I ever had the chance to help a woman in a similar situation, I would do it." The raw honesty in his words touched something deep in Susannah's heart. "I am sorry about your sister. So am I, every day." He looked at her directly again. "I am not asking you to love me, Miss Norton. I am offering you a choice, a way out. If you would rather take your chances with this Pemberton fellow, I will respect that. But if you want another option, I am here." Susannah's mind whirled with possibilities and consequences. She knew nothing about this man beyond what he had told her in the last few minutes. He could be lying about everything, and yet something in her gut, some instinct she could not name, told her that Knox Winston was exactly who he appeared to be, a rough, honest man offering genuine help. "How would we even accomplish this?" she asked. "My uncle would never agree. He has already accepted payment from Mr. Pemberton. Then we do not ask his permission." Knox's voice was matter of fact. "There is a circuit preacher who comes through town. Last I heard, he was staying at the boarding house on 2nd Street. We go there right now, we get married, and it is done. Your uncle cannot force you to marry Pemberton if you are already someone else's wife. He will be furious. He might try to have the marriage annulled." "On what grounds? If we get married legal and proper, there is nothing he can do about it." "You are of age, are you not?" "I am 21. "Then you have the right to choose your own husband." Knox stood, his full height impressive in the small chapel. He offered his hand to help her up. "What do you say, Miss Norton?" Do you want to stay trapped, or do you want to take a chance on something different? Susannah looked at his outstretched hand, strong and steady and sure. She thought of Gerald Pemberton's cold eyes and clammy hands. She thought of the prayer she had just offered up, begging for deliverance. And she thought of how this stranger had knelt beside her in her moment of deepest despair, offering not empty platitudes but real, tangible help. She took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. "Let us go find that preacher before I lose my nerve." Knox's face broke into a smile, the expression transforming his rugged features into something almost boyish. "You are braver than you think, Miss Norton." They left the chapel together, stepping out into the bright morning sunshine. Tucumcari was beginning to wake up, shopkeepers opening their doors and early risers moving about their business. Susannah felt as though she were walking through a dream as Knox led her down the dusty main street toward the boarding house. The preacher, Reverend Samuel Clark, was indeed staying there. He was a thin, elderly man with kind eyes who listened to their story without judgment. When Knox explained the situation in plain terms, leaving out nothing about Susannah's circumstances or the rushed nature of their decision, Reverend Clark studied them both carefully. "Marriage is a sacred covenant," he said finally. "Not something to be entered into lightly, even under difficult circumstances. Are you both certain this is what you want?" "I am certain," Knox said without hesitation. Susannah took a deep breath. "I am certain as well." The Reverend nodded slowly. "Then I will perform the ceremony. But I want you both to understand what you are committing to. This is not a temporary arrangement. This is for life before God and man. Can you both honor that?" "Yes, sir," they said in unison. Reverend Clark called for his wife to serve as a witness, and within the hour, Susannah Norton became Susannah Winston. The ceremony was simple and quick, conducted in the boarding house parlor with Mrs. Clark dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. When Knox slipped a simple silver band onto Susannah's finger, she noticed that his hands were shaking slightly, and realized that he was not as calm about this as he appeared. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Clark said, and Susannah's heart jumped into her throat. Knox leaned down, his hands gentle on her shoulders, and pressed a soft, chaste kiss to her lips. It lasted only a moment, but Susannah felt the warmth of it all the way to her toes. They signed the marriage certificate. Reverend Clark added his signature and seal, and just like that, Susannah was married to a man she had met less than 2 hours ago. As they walked out of the boarding house, the reality of what she had done began to sink in. She was married to a mountain man. A stranger. She was going to live in a cabin in the wilderness, far from any town or neighbors. What had she been thinking? Knox must have sensed her rising panic because he stopped in the middle of the street and turned to face her. "Are you all right?" "I just married a complete stranger," she said, her voice slightly breathless. "I have no idea what I am doing." "You are surviving," he said simply. "You are choosing your own path instead of letting others choose it for you. That takes courage." He paused. "We need to go tell your uncle." "Best to get it over with." Susannah's stomach dropped. "He is going to be so angry." "Let him be angry. You are my wife now. He has no power over you anymore." Knox offered his arm. "Come on, I will be right there with you." Uncle Edmund and Aunt Constance were taking breakfast in the dining room of the small hotel where they were staying. Their expressions when Susannah walked in with Knox at her side were almost comical in their shock. "Susannah, what is the meaning of this?" Uncle Edmund demanded, rising from his chair. "Who is this man?" "This is my husband, Knox Winston," Susannah said, proud that her voice only shook a little. "We were married this morning by Reverend Clark." The silence that followed was deafening. Uncle Edmund's face turned an alarming shade of purple, while Aunt Constance gasped and clutched at her chest. "Married? Uncle Edmund finally sputtered. "You cannot be married. You are engaged to Mr. Pemberton. The wedding is in 2 days." "I am afraid there will not be a wedding," Susannah said. "I am already married. This is outrageous. I will have this sham of a marriage annulled immediately." "You had no permission, no proper courtship." "No, she is 21 years old," Knox interrupted, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. "She does not need your permission. We were married legal and proper by a man of God with witnesses present. There is nothing to annul." Uncle Edmund turned his fury on Knox. "You will regret this, whoever you are. Do you have any idea who you have crossed? Mr. Pemberton is a very powerful man. He will not take kindly to being made a fool of." "Then perhaps Mr. Pemberton should not have attempted to buy a wife like she was a piece of property," Knox said evenly. "Now, my wife and I will be collecting her belongings and leaving. I trust there will be no trouble about that. Her belongings. Everything she has came from my generosity. She is entitled to nothing." "Actually," Susannah spoke up, finding her courage, "my mother's jewelry and my father's books belong to me. They were specifically left to me in the will. I will be taking those." Uncle Edmund looked as though he might explode, but Aunt Constance put a restraining hand on his arm. "Let her take her mother's things, Edmund. It is not worth the scandal if she makes a scene." It took less than 15 minutes for Susannah to gather her few possessions. A small trunk containing her clothes, her mother's jewelry box, and a leather satchel of books. Knox carried the trunk easily as though it weighed nothing, while Susannah clutched the other items. As they left the hotel, Uncle Edmund called after them, "You will regret this, Susannah. Mark my words. When you are starving in some hovel, do not come crying to me." Susannah did not look back. Knox had a wagon and team waiting at the livery, already loaded with supplies. He secured Susannah's trunk among the other goods, then helped her up onto the seat. The touch of his hands at her waist was gentle but firm, and she found herself acutely aware of his strength. "We will stay in town one more night," Knox said as he climbed up beside her. "I have a few more supplies to pick up, and it will give you time to catch your breath before we head up to the cabin. There is a decent hotel on the edge of town, run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson. We can get a room there." A room. One room, because they were married. The reality of her situation hit Susannah again, and she must have made some small sound because Knox glanced at her sharply. "I will sleep on the floor," he said quietly. "You have nothing to fear from me, Susannah. I meant what I said in the chapel. I will never force you to do anything you do not want to do." The use of her first name without the formal Miss Norton reminded her again that everything had changed. "Thank you," she managed. "And you may call me Sarah if you like. My mother always did. Sarah." He tried it out, and somehow it sounded different in his deep voice. "I like that. Suits you better than Susannah." They rode through town in silence, and Susannah noticed several people staring at them. News would spread quickly in a town this size. By evening, everyone would know that Edmund Norton's niece had run off and married a mountain man. Mrs. Patterson's hotel was small but clean, and the widow herself was a plump, cheerful woman who congratulated them on their marriage with genuine warmth. A honeymoon couple. How lovely. "I have just the room for you, nice and private at the end of the hall." The room was indeed pleasant, with a large bed covered in a colorful quilt, a washstand, and a window overlooking the desert landscape beyond town. Knox set Susannah's trunk down and immediately began arranging his bedroll on the floor beside the bed. "You do not have to sleep on the floor," Susannah heard herself say. "The bed is large enough for two, and I trust you to keep your word." Knox straightened, looking at her with surprise. "Are you sure? We are married," she said practically. "We may as well become accustomed to sharing space." Something warm flickered in his eyes. All right, but I will stay on top of the covers and you let me know if you get uncomfortable with the arrangement. They spent the afternoon walking through town while Knox completed his business. He introduced her as his wife to the merchants he dealt with, and Susannah found herself the recipient of many curious but generally friendly looks. The general store owner, Mr. Chen, congratulated them heartily and insisted on giving Susannah a length of pretty calico fabric as a wedding gift. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they returned to the hotel for supper. Mrs. Patterson had prepared a special meal in honor of their marriage: roasted chicken, fresh bread, and dried apple pie. Sitting across from Knox at the small table, Susannah studied her new husband in the lamplight. He had strong, angular features beneath the beard, and his hands, though calloused and scarred from hard work, moved with surprising grace as he ate. He caught her watching him and paused. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I know so little about you," she admitted. "Where are you from originally? Do you have other family besides your sister?" Knox set down his fork, leaning back in his chair. "I am from Colorado originally. My father had a ranch up in the mountains near Denver. I have two brothers, both still working the ranch with our father. My mother died when I was 12. My sister Emily was the youngest and the only girl." "What made you leave the ranch?" His expression grew distant. "After Emily died, I could not stay there anymore. Too many memories and too much anger at my father for what he had done. I drifted for a while, ended up here in New Mexico, and found I liked the solitude of the mountains. Built myself a cabin, learned to trap and hunt. It is a simple life, but it is mine. Do you ever see your family? Not in 5 years. Maybe that makes me a coward, but I am not ready to forgive them yet." He met her eyes. "What about you? Tell me about your parents." Susannah felt the familiar ache of grief. "My father was a schoolteacher in Philadelphia. My mother was gentle and kind, always volunteering with the church. They died last winter in a fire. Our house caught while they were sleeping, and they never made it out. I was staying with a friend that night, which is the only reason I survived." "I am sorry," Knox said, and the genuine sympathy in his voice made tears prick at her eyes. "My Uncle Edmund was my father's only brother, but they were never close. He agreed to take me in, but I think he always resented the obligation. When he decided to move west to open a trading post, I had no choice but to come with him. And then Mr. Pemberton appeared, and Uncle Edmund saw an opportunity to be rid of me while profiting in the process." "You are not a burden," Knox said firmly, "and you never will be, not to me." The conviction in his words warmed her. "You are a good man, Knox Winston." "I think God heard my prayer after all." Color rose in his cheeks beneath the beard. "I am just a man trying to do the right thing." After supper, they prepared for bed with an awkwardness that was perhaps inevitable given the circumstances. Susannah changed into her nightgown behind the privacy screen while Knox stepped out into the hallway. When she called that she was ready, he returned, already dressed in the long underwear he slept in. True to his word, he stayed on top of the covers while Susannah burrowed beneath them. The bed was indeed large enough that there was a respectable distance between them, but she was still intensely aware of his presence, his warmth, his steady breathing. "Knox," she whispered into the darkness. "Yes, thank you for everything, for giving me a choice." "You are welcome, Sarah." There was a pause. "Sleep well." But sleep was a long time coming for Susannah. Her mind kept replaying the events of the day, from her desperate prayers in the chapel to the vows she had spoken just hours ago. She had married a stranger, legally bound herself to a man she knew almost nothing about. And yet somehow, lying there in the darkness with Knox's solid presence beside her, she felt safer than she had in months. The next morning, they rose early and loaded the wagon for the journey into the mountains. Knox estimated it would take most of the day to reach his cabin, and he wanted to make good time. Mrs. Patterson packed them a lunch and waved them off with best wishes for their happiness. As Tucumcari disappeared behind them, and the landscape grew more rugged, Susannah felt a mix of trepidation and excitement. The desert gave way to rolling hills dotted with juniper and piñon pine. The air grew cooler as they climbed in elevation, and the quality of light seemed different, clearer somehow. Knox pointed out landmarks as they traveled. A distinctive rock formation that marked the turn off from the main trail, a stream where he sometimes fished, a meadow where elk often grazed in the early morning. He was patient with her questions, and Susannah found herself relaxing in his company. They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat the lunch Mrs. Patterson had prepared. Sitting on a fallen log with the vast landscape spread out before them, Susannah felt a sense of possibility she had not experienced in a long time. "It is beautiful here," she said. "Wild and a bit frightening, but beautiful." "Wait until you see the view from the cabin," Knox said. "On clear days you can see for miles, nothing but mountains and sky." "I should probably confess something," Susannah said. "I have very limited domestic skills. My mother tried to teach me, but I was always more interested in reading. I can cook simple things, and I know basic sewing, but I am hardly an accomplished homemaker." Knox looked amused rather than dismayed. "That is all right. I can teach you what you need to know, and the rest we will figure out together. I am not expecting perfection, Sarah. I am just expecting honesty and effort." "Those I can give you," she promised. They reached the cabin in the late afternoon. It was indeed small, a single room built of sturdy logs with a stone fireplace at one end and a loft space above reached by a ladder. But it was solid and well made, and the view from the front porch was everything Knox had promised. Mountains rose all around them, their peaks still touched with snow despite the summer season. The forest pressed close on three sides, and a clear stream ran nearby, its music audible even from the cabin. Knox helped her down from the wagon and watched her face as she took it all in. "What do you think?" "I think it is perfect," she said honestly. "It feels like we are the only two people in the world." Something in his expression softened. "Some days it feels like that. Can get lonely sometimes, which is why I make the trip to town regular. But there is a peace here you do not find many other places." Over the next few hours, Knox showed her around the property. There was a small barn for the horses and mules, a smokehouse, a root cellar dug into the hillside, and a chicken coop that was currently empty. "Was planning to get some chickens next time I went to town," Knox explained. "Did not see the point for just me, but now that you are here, fresh eggs would be nice." Inside the cabin, Susannah explored her new home. The furnishings were simple but well crafted. A table and chairs Knox had built himself, a large bed in one corner with a frame made of pine, shelves for supplies and dishes, and the fireplace with cooking implements. The loft above held furs and extra supplies. "Where will I sleep?" she asked, looking at the single bed. "That is your bed now," Knox said. "I will sleep in the loft." "Knox, this is your home. I cannot take your bed. You are my wife. The bed is yours." His tone left no room for argument. "I will bring up your trunk." That first evening in the cabin, they worked together to prepare a simple supper of salt pork and beans. Knox showed her how to work the fireplace for cooking, and Susannah was relieved to find that she managed not to burn anything. They ate by lamplight, talking easily about the routine of life in the mountains. "Summer is the easy season," Knox explained. "We need to use this time to prepare for winter. There is a garden plot out back that needs tending. We will need to smoke and salt meat, gather and dry herbs, make sure we have enough firewood. Come November, we will be snowed in for months." The idea should have been terrifying, but instead, Susannah found it almost comforting. A whole winter with no demands from society, no unwanted suitors, just the simple work of survival. "Will you teach me?" she asked. "Everything I need to know, of course." Knox smiled at her across the table. "We are partners in this, Sarah. Everything we do together." That night, Susannah lay in the big bed while Knox climbed the ladder to the loft. The sounds of the mountain night filtered through the walls, wind in the trees, the distant call of an owl, the creek babbling over stones. She thought about the prayer she had offered up just 2 days ago, desperate and afraid. God had answered, just not in any way she could have expected. He had sent her Knox Winston, a rough mountain man with gentle eyes and a kind heart. A man who had knelt beside her in her moment of greatest need and offered her hope. She fell asleep with a smile on her face, feeling the first stirrings of something she had not felt in a very long time. Happiness. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Knox woke before dawn each morning and started the fire, letting Susannah sleep a bit longer. She would rise to find coffee already brewed and usually some kind of breakfast prepared. After eating, they would tackle the day's work together. Knox taught her to tend the garden, showing her which plants were vegetables and which were weeds. He taught her to fish in the stream, laughing good-naturedly when she fell in trying to reach a particularly nice trout. He taught her to recognize animal tracks and edible plants, to split firewood and stack it properly for drying. Susannah proved to be a quick learner, and while she lacked physical strength, she made up for it in determination. She did not complain when her hands blistered or her back ached. She simply wrapped her hands and kept working, earning Knox's respect and admiration. In the evenings, after supper was cleaned up and the day's work done, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the mountains. Sometimes they talked, Knox sharing stories of his years alone in the wilderness, Susannah telling him about the books she loved and the dreams she had once had of becoming a teacher like her father. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, enjoying the peace. Slowly, almost without Susannah realizing it was happening, her feelings for Knox began to change. She found herself noticing little things. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the gentleness in his rough hands when he helped her with a difficult task, the quiet strength he carried so easily. She noticed how he always made sure she ate the best portions of their meals, how he checked the loft for spiders because he knew she was afraid of them, how he listened when she talked, as though everything she said mattered. One morning, about 3 weeks after their arrival at the cabin, Susannah woke to find Knox had left the cabin early. This was not unusual. He often checked his trap lines before breakfast. But when he had not returned by mid-morning, she began to worry. She was standing on the porch, shading her eyes against the sun and scanning the tree line, when she heard a sound that made her blood run cold. A deep, rumbling growl. Turning slowly, Susannah saw an enormous black bear emerge from the forest not 20 yards from the cabin. It was massive, easily weighing several hundred pounds, and it was moving toward her with clear intent. Terror froze her in place for a crucial second. Then survival instinct kicked in and she backed slowly toward the cabin door. But the bear was faster. It charged, covering the distance with terrifying speed. Susannah screamed. The rifle shot cracked through the air like thunder. The bear stumbled and fell less than 10 feet from the porch, dead before it hit the ground. Susannah whirled to see Knox running toward her from the tree line, his rifle still smoking. He reached her in seconds, gathering her into his arms. "Are you hurt? Did it touch you?" No, I am fine," she gasped, her whole body shaking. "You killed it." "Damn right I killed it." Knox's arms tightened around her, and Susannah realized he was shaking too. "When I saw it charging at you, I thought my heart would stop." He pulled back just enough to look at her face, his hands cupping her cheeks. "Sarah, if something had happened to you," he did not finish the sentence. Instead, he kissed her. This was nothing like the chaste kiss they had shared at their wedding. This was fierce and desperate, a kiss that tasted of fear and relief, and something deeper that made Susannah's heart pound. She found herself kissing him back with equal intensity, her hands fisting in his shirt. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Knox rested his forehead against hers. "I am sorry. I should not have—" "Do not apologize," Susannah interrupted. "Please do not apologize." He pulled back to look at her, and what she saw in his eyes made her breath catch. "Sarah, I know this marriage started as a practical arrangement, a way to help you escape a bad situation. But somewhere along the way, my feelings changed. You are not just someone I am helping anymore." "You are—" He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "You are important to me too," Susannah said softly. "More than I expected, more than I thought possible in such a short time." Knox's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He kissed her again, softer this time but no less meaningful. When he lifted his head, his expression was almost shy. "I know I am not much to look at, and I cannot offer you the kind of life you grew up with, but if you are willing, I would like this to be a real marriage, in every way." "I am willing," Susannah whispered, "very willing." The joy on his face was beautiful to see. He kissed her once more, then seemed to remember the dead bear. "I should deal with that. Bear meat is good eating, and the hide will make a fine rug for the cabin floor." Susannah looked at the massive carcass and shuddered. It was so close. Too close. Knox's expression was grim. "I should have been here. I got a later start checking the traps than usual, or I would have seen the tracks and known there was a bear in the area. You could not have known, and you got here in time. That is what matters." It took Knox most of the day to butcher the bear and prepare the meat for smoking. Susannah helped as much as she could, though the process was messy and a bit gruesome. But she was learning that life in the mountains did not allow for squeamishness. They ate what they killed, and they wasted nothing. That night, after a late supper, Knox came to sit beside Susannah on the edge of the bed rather than climbing to the loft. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. "About us?" In answer, Susannah reached up and cupped his bearded face in her hands. "I have never been more sure of anything." What followed was tender and sweet, Knox's gentleness a stark contrast to his rough exterior. He was patient, taking his time, making sure Susannah felt cherished and safe. And when they finally came together as husband and wife in truth, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Afterward, lying in Knox's arms with her head on his broad chest, listening to the steady thump of his heartbeat, Susannah felt a profound sense of rightness. This was where she belonged. With this man in this place, building a life together. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. She felt Knox's sharp intake of breath. "Say that again." She lifted her head to look at him. "I love you, Knox Winston." His smile was radiant. "I love you too, Sarah Winston. Think I have been falling in love with you since the moment I saw you in that chapel." He kissed her then, long and slow and deep, and Susannah felt happiness bloom in her chest like a flower opening to the sun. The summer days stretched long and golden as Susannah and Knox settled into their life together. The garden flourished under their care, producing more vegetables than Susannah had thought possible. Knox brought home deer and elk from his hunts, and they worked together to preserve the meat for winter. Susannah learned to can and pickle, to smoke fish and cure hides, but more importantly, they grew closer with each passing day. Knox taught Susannah to shoot, patiently correcting her stance and aim until she could hit a target with reasonable accuracy. Susannah read to Knox in the evenings from her father's books, discovering that her rough mountain man had a fondness for poetry and adventure stories. They made love often, learning each other's bodies and preferences, finding joy and pleasure in their physical connection. But it was the small moments of intimacy that Susannah treasured most. Knox braiding her hair before bed, the way he always reached for her hand when they walked together, the soft looks they exchanged across the table. In early August, Knox announced that he needed to make another trip to Tucumcari to trade pelts and pick up supplies they could not produce themselves. "Would you like to come?" he asked. "Or would you rather stay here? It is a long trip." "I will come," Susannah said immediately. "I want to stay with you." The journey to town took on a different character this time. They camped under the stars the first night, Knox showing Susannah how to read the constellations. They made love in their bedroll with the vast expanse of sky above them, and Susannah thought she had never felt so free. Tucumcari welcomed them warmly. Mrs. Patterson exclaimed over how healthy and happy Susannah looked, and Mr. Chen congratulated Knox on his marriage with knowing winks. They restocked their supplies, Knox letting Susannah pick out fabric and thread for sewing projects, and bought a crate of young chickens to start their flock. They were loading the wagon when a familiar voice cut through the pleasant afternoon. "So the rumors are true. You did actually marry that savage." Susannah turned to find Gerald Pemberton approaching, his face twisted with contempt. Uncle Edmund hovered behind him, looking uncomfortable. "Mr. Pemberton," Susannah said coolly, "I am surprised you are still in Tucumcari. I had business to conclude." "Business that was quite thoroughly disrupted by your little stunt." His gaze raked over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "I must say, you look rather worse for wear. Mountain life clearly does not suit you." Knox stepped between Susannah and Pemberton, his expression dangerous. "You will watch your tongue when you speak to my wife," Pemberton sneered. "Your wife? She is a foolish girl who made a foolish choice. When she tires of living like an animal in the wilderness, she will come crawling back, begging for." He did not get to finish the sentence because Knox's fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling in the dirt. "Knox, no." Susannah grabbed his arm, though part of her was fiercely glad to see Pemberton on the ground. "He disrespected you," Knox said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "I will not stand for that." Pemberton scrambled to his feet, blood trickling from his split lip. "You will regret that, you backwoods brute. I will have the law on you for assault." "Go ahead," Knox said evenly. "There are a dozen witnesses here who saw you insult my wife. I was defending her honor." Several of the townspeople who had gathered to watch murmured agreement. Pemberton's face flushed red, but he seemed to realize he had no support. He turned on Uncle Edmund instead. "Are you going to let him get away with this?" Uncle Edmund, looking older and more tired than Susannah remembered, just shook his head. "Leave it be, Pemberton. The girl is married." "It is done." Pemberton shot Susannah one last venomous look before stalking away. Uncle Edmund lingered for a moment, his gaze meeting Susannah's. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly. Susannah was surprised by the question. She looked at Knox, standing protective and solid beside her, and felt a rush of love so powerful it nearly stole her breath. "Yes," she said, "I am very happy." Uncle Edmund nodded slowly. "Then I suppose it all worked out." He turned and walked away without another word. On the journey back to the cabin, Susannah was quiet, processing the encounter. Knox kept glancing at her with concern. "Are you all right?" he finally asked. "I am fine. Better than fine, actually." She reached over and took his hand. "Seeing Pemberton again just reminded me how blessed I am. If you had not come into that chapel when you did, I would be married to that horrible man right now." Knox raised her hand to his lips and kissed it. God works in mysterious ways. He certainly does. Susannah leaned her head against Knox's shoulder. Take me home. Autumn arrived with a riot of color as the aspens turned gold and the oak brush flamed red. The days grew shorter, and Knox became increasingly focused on winter preparations. They split and stacked cords of firewood, filled the root cellar with vegetables from the garden, and hung bundles of herbs from the rafters to dry. One crisp October morning, Susannah woke to a feeling of nausea that sent her running outside to be sick. Knox found her there, pale and shaking, and immediately wanted to ride for the doctor in town. "I am fine," Susannah assured him, though she was beginning to suspect what might be wrong, or rather what might be wonderfully right. The nausea continued for several days, always worst in the morning. Susannah's suspicions grew into certainty, and finally she shared her news with Knox over breakfast. "I think I am with child," she said softly. Knox dropped his fork. "You are sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor's confirmation, but I have all the signs my mother described." For a moment, Knox just stared at her. Then a grin spread across his face, bright as the sunrise. He came around the table and pulled her into his arms, lifting her clear off the ground and spinning her around. "We are going to have a baby." Susannah laughed, dizzy from the spinning and the joy in his voice. "Yes, we are." "When?" "I think sometime in late May or early June, if my calculations are correct." Knox set her down gently as though she might break. "Are you happy about this?" "Deliriously happy," Susannah assured him. She cupped his face in her hands. "I am going to have a baby with the man I love. How could I be anything but happy?" He kissed her, sweet and tender. "I will take such good care of you, both of you, I promise." And he did. As winter closed in and the first snows fell, Knox treated Susannah like she was made of glass. He insisted she rest often, took over the heavier chores completely, and hovered over her constantly. It was endearing, if occasionally frustrating. The winter was long and harsh, just as Knox had warned. By December, they were completely snowed in, the drifts reaching past the windows in places. But inside the cabin, life was warm and cozy. They spent the long evenings reading together, talking about their hopes for the baby and making plans for the future. Knox carved a beautiful cradle from pine, sanding it smooth and rubbing it with oil until it gleamed. Susannah sewed tiny gowns and blankets, marveling at how small they were. They argued good-naturedly over names, though neither would commit to a final choice until they knew whether they were having a boy or girl. Sometimes, during the deepest part of winter when the world outside was nothing but white and silence, Susannah would reflect on how much her life had changed. A year ago, she had been in Philadelphia with her parents, never imagining the tragedy and transformation that awaited her. 6 months ago, she had been desperate and trapped, praying for deliverance in a small chapel in Tucumcari. Now she was here in a cabin in the mountains, married to a man she loved beyond measure, carrying his child. It seemed impossible, the kind of miracle she had hardly dared to pray for. Yet it was real. "What are you thinking about?" Knox asked one evening, looking up from the leather he was working. "About miracles," Susannah said. "About how God answered my prayer in the most unexpected way possible." Knox set aside his work and came to sit beside her, pulling her into his arms. "I was not looking for anyone when I walked into that chapel. I had convinced myself I was happy alone. But the moment I saw you there, so brave and broken, something in my heart just knew." "Knew what?" "That you were mine to protect, mine to love, mine to build a life with." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Best decision I ever made, kneeling down beside you that morning. Best decision I ever made, saying yes when you asked me to marry you," Susannah replied. They sat together in the firelight, the baby moving gently between them, and Susannah thought that this moment, right here, was everything she had ever wanted. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it was glorious. The snow melted in rushing torrents, the meadows exploded with wildflowers, and new life seemed to be everywhere Susannah looked. Her own body was changing too, her belly now round and prominent, the baby's movements strong enough that Knox could feel them when he placed his hand over her stomach. "He is going to be a strong one," Knox said one evening, feeling an especially vigorous kick. "Or she is," Susannah countered. "Do not assume we are having a boy." "Boy or girl, I will love this child with everything I have," Knox promised. In late May, Susannah woke in the middle of the night with the first pangs of labor. Knox, who had been sleeping lightly for weeks in anticipation of this moment, was up immediately. "Is it time?" he asked. "I think so," Susannah said through gritted teeth as another contraction gripped her. They had prepared as best they could. Knox had ridden to town a month earlier to bring back Mrs. Patterson, who had experience with birthing, and had agreed to stay through Susannah's delivery. The older woman took charge immediately, sending Knox to boil water and prepare clean linens. The labor was long and difficult. Susannah had never experienced pain like this, waves of it that seemed to go on forever. But Knox was there through all of it, letting her grip his hand hard enough to leave marks, wiping her face with a cool cloth, whispering words of encouragement. "You are so strong," he told her during a particularly intense contraction. "So brave. Just a little longer, my love." Finally, as the sun was setting and painting the sky gold and rose, Susannah gave one last mighty push and heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her baby's first cry. "It is a boy," Mrs. Patterson announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A fine, healthy boy." She cleaned him quickly and wrapped him in a soft blanket before placing him in Susannah's arms. Susannah looked down at her son's tiny, perfect face and felt her heart expand with a love so fierce and overwhelming it brought tears to her eyes. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." Knox was staring at the baby with an expression of absolute wonder. "He is perfect," he said hoarsely. "Sarah, he is perfect." "Would you like to hold him?" Susannah asked. Knox's hands trembled slightly as he took the baby, cradling him with exquisite gentleness despite his size and strength. "Hey there, son," he murmured. "I am your father. And I promise you, I am going to do everything in my power to keep you safe and happy." The baby, seeming to recognize his father's voice, quieted and blinked up at Knox with unfocused eyes. "What should we name him?" Susannah asked. They had discussed many options over the winter, but standing there with their son in his arms, Knox knew exactly what felt right. "What about William? After your father?" Susannah's eyes filled with fresh tears. "You would do that, of course. Your father must have been a good man to raise a daughter like you. It would be an honor to name our son after him." Knox looked down at the baby. "William Winston, Billy for short." "It is perfect," Susannah whispered. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson stayed for another week, helping Susannah recover and teaching her everything she needed to know about caring for a newborn. Knox was an attentive and devoted father from the very first day, changing diapers without complaint and walking the floor with Billy when he fussed. The sight of her big, rough mountain man cradling their tiny son and singing softly to him in that deep rumble of a voice never failed to make Susannah's heart melt. The first year of Billy's life was a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder. Susannah and Knox marveled over every milestone, the first smile, the first laugh, the first tooth. Billy was a happy baby, quick to smile and seemingly fascinated by everything around him. That second summer at the cabin was the happiest time of Susannah's life. She and Knox worked together tending the garden and caring for Billy, who spent his days napping in the cradle Knox had made or being carried in a sling against Susannah's chest. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch as a family, watching the sunset while Billy babbled and waved his chubby fists. Knox proved to be every bit as devoted a father as he was a husband. He was patient with Billy's crying, gentle with his handling, and absolutely fearless about the messy realities of infant care. Susannah fell even more in love with him watching him interact with their son. When autumn came around again and it was time for another trip to Tucumcari, they went as a family. The townspeople exclaimed over Billy, and Mrs. Patterson cried happy tears holding the baby she had helped bring into the world. They were loading supplies into the wagon when a familiar figure approached. Uncle Edmund looked older than the last time Susannah had seen him, his hair now completely gray. "I heard you had a son," he said without preamble. "I wanted to see for myself that you are well." Susannah was surprised but not displeased. "We are very well, Uncle. Would you like to meet your great-nephew?" Edmund's expression softened as he looked at Billy, who was happily gumming a teething ring in Knox's arms. "He is a fine boy. Looks like his father." "He has my mother's eyes, though," Susannah pointed out. Edmund nodded slowly. "I owe you an apology, Susannah. I treated you poorly, tried to force you into a situation that would have made you miserable. I was thinking only of my own gain, not your welfare." Susannah was quiet for a moment, considering. She could hold onto her anger and resentment, or she could choose forgiveness. Looking at Knox and Billy, at the beautiful life she had built, she found that forgiveness came easily. "I accept your apology," she said. "What is done is done. I harbor no ill will." Relief washed over Edmund's face. "Thank you, and for what it is worth, you clearly made the right choice. Your husband seems like a good man." "He is the best man I know," Susannah said firmly. They parted on better terms than Susannah had thought possible. On the ride home, Knox reached over and squeezed her hand. "You are remarkable," he said. "The way you forgave him, even after what he tried to do." "Holding on to anger would only hurt me," Susannah said, "and I have too much to be grateful for to waste energy on bitterness." The years flowed by like the stream beside the cabin, each season bringing its own joys and challenges. Billy grew into a bright, energetic toddler who loved following his father around and helping with chores. When he was 3 years old, Susannah discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she carried a girl. Ruth Emily Winston came into the world on a snowy December night, her birth easier than her brother's had been. She had Susannah's delicate features and Knox's gray eyes, and from the moment she was born, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. "2 children," Knox said one evening, holding Ruth while Billy climbed all over him. "We are blessed beyond measure." "We are indeed," Susannah agreed, watching her family with a heart so full it could burst. Life in the mountains continued its steady rhythm. Knox taught Billy to fish and track animals, while Susannah taught Ruth to recognize letters and numbers. They were a tight-knit family unit, isolated from the outside world for much of the year but never lonely. When Billy was 6 and Ruth 3, Susannah announced a third pregnancy. This time, twins. 2 boys they named Peter and Samuel. The cabin, which had once seemed spacious for just 2 people, now rang with the sounds of children's laughter and sometimes tears. Knox added a second room to the cabin, giving the older children a space of their own. He built more beds, more shelves, more everything to accommodate their growing family. And through it all, his love for Susannah never wavered. If anything, it grew deeper with each passing year. "Remember when you told me you had limited domestic skills?" Knox teased one evening, watching Susannah effortlessly manage supper while simultaneously helping Ruth with a puzzle and keeping the twins out of mischief. "I have learned a few things over the years," Susannah said with a smile, "thanks to a very patient teacher. You give me too much credit. You are a natural at this." He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I love you more every day, Sarah Winston. Did I ever tell you that?" "Only about 1,000 times," she said, leaning back against his solid warmth. "But I never tire of hearing it." The children grew and thrived. Billy became a skilled hunter and tracker like his father. Ruth showed an aptitude for healing and was fascinated by herbs and medicine. The twins were identical in appearance but opposite in temperament. Peter was quiet and thoughtful, while Samuel was bold and adventurous. On Billy's 18th birthday, Knox gave him a choice. "You can stay here and help me with the trapping, or you can go out and find your own path. Either way, you have my support." Billy, who had grown into a young man nearly as tall and broad as his father, did not hesitate. "I want to stay. This mountain, this life, it is in my blood. Besides, someone needs to help you keep up with the twins." Knox's pride in his eldest son was evident in his smile. "Then we work together as partners. Equal shares in everything." Ruth, when her time came, chose differently. At 19, she announced her intention to go to Santa Fe and study medicine. "There is so much I could learn," she said, her gray eyes bright with excitement. "And then I could come back and help people here in the territory who do not have access to doctors." Susannah's heart ached at the thought of her daughter leaving, but she understood the pull of dreams. "Your grandfather was a teacher," she told Ruth. "He believed education was the key to a better life. I think he would be proud of you." Knox, though clearly struggling with the idea of his little girl leaving, ultimately gave his blessing. "You chase those dreams," he told her, "and know that you always have a home to come back to." The twins, now 16, had already started talking about partnering together to start their own trapping operation in a different part of the mountains. "Not too far from here," Samuel assured his mother. "Close enough to visit regular." Sitting on the porch one evening with Knox, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold, Susannah reflected on the life they had built together. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "Taking a chance on a desperate woman in a chapel?" Knox looked at her as though she had lost her mind. "Regret marrying you? Sarah, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You gave me love, a family, a purpose beyond just surviving. How could I ever regret that?" "We had no idea what we were getting into," Susannah pointed out. "We were practically strangers." "Maybe we were strangers in the details," Knox conceded. "But I think our souls recognized each other that day in the chapel. You were mine, and I was yours. We just had to figure out the rest." He took her hand, his thumb tracing over the silver band he had placed there so many years ago. "I would make the same choice 1,000 times over." Susannah lifted his hand to her lips and kissed it. "So would I." They sat in comfortable silence, hands joined, hearts joined, watching the day fade into night. In the distance, they could hear Billy calling the twins in for supper, Ruth's laugh floating through the open cabin door. "We did good," Knox said softly. "Built something real and lasting out of nothing but faith and hard work." "We did," Susannah agreed, "and it all started with a prayer." Knox smiled, that same warm, gentle smile that had first made her feel safe all those years ago. Best answered prayer in the history of answered prayers. As the stars began to appear overhead, one by one like diamonds scattered across black velvet, Susannah thought about the young woman she had been, kneeling alone in that chapel in Tucumcari. She had been so lost, so afraid, with no idea what the future held. She could never have imagined this, a life of purpose and meaning in the wild mountains of New Mexico. a husband who loved her with unwavering devotion, children who were healthy and happy and finding their own paths in the world. She had prayed for deliverance and received so much more. She had received everything. Years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their children's lives. Ruth did go to Santa Fe to study medicine, returning 3 years later as a certified physician. She set up a practice in Tucumcari, becoming the first female doctor in that part of the territory, and earning respect through her skill and dedication. She married a lawyer named Thomas Grant when she was 24, a kind man who supported her medical practice and shared her passion for helping others. They had 3 children and were blissfully happy. Billy took over more and more of the trapping business as Knox grew older, though his father remained active and engaged. At 23, Billy married a young woman named Catherine, who had come west with her family to homestead nearby. She was strong and practical, perfect for mountain life, and she and Susannah became close friends. Billy and Catherine built their own cabin about a mile from Knox and Susannah's place, close enough for easy visiting but far enough for privacy. They had 4 children in quick succession, filling the mountain with another generation of Winstons. The twins did indeed start their own trapping operation, working in partnership just as they had done everything else their whole lives. Peter married a schoolteacher from Santa Fe and settled in town, while Samuel remained a bachelor, declaring he was married to the mountains and needed no other wife. Knox and Susannah grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. Knox's hair turned silver and his beard grew white, but his eyes remained the same clear gray that had first captured Susannah's heart. Susannah's own hair silvered gracefully, and her face lined with the marks of a life well lived. They became grandparents many times over, and their cabin was often filled with visiting grandchildren who loved to hear stories of the old days. Susannah would tell them about arriving in Tucumcari, about the chapel and the prayer. Knox would tell them about seeing their grandmother for the first time and knowing, just knowing, that she was meant to be his. The grandchildren loved these stories, begging to hear them again and again. And Susannah never tired of telling them, because they were true stories about real love and faith and miracles. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a celebration at Billy's cabin. There was food and music and dancing, and at one point, Knox pulled Susannah aside to a quiet corner. 30 years, he said wonderingly, feels like both a lifetime and no time at all. I know exactly what you mean, Susannah said. She looked out at their family, gathered and laughing and happy, and felt overwhelming gratitude. Look at what we made, Knox. Not just children and grandchildren, but a legacy of love. It all started with you, Knox said. Your courage to take a chance on a stranger. Your faith that things would work out. And your kindness, Susannah countered. Your willingness to help someone in need even though you gained nothing from it. Knox laughed. Nothing. Sarah, I gained everything. You, our children, this whole beautiful life. I was the one who benefited most from our bargain. They danced together as the sun set, moving slowly to music played on Billy's fiddle. Susannah rested her head against Knox's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, just as she had done countless times over the past 3 decades. I love you, she whispered. I love you too, Knox replied, his arms tightening around her, forever and always. When Susannah was 65 and Knox 67, he fell ill with a fever that would not break. Ruth came from town and did everything she could, but they all knew the truth. Knox's time was coming to an end. On a clear autumn morning with golden leaves falling outside the window and his family gathered around, Knox drew his last breath. He went peacefully, holding Susannah's hand, a slight smile on his face as though he could see something wonderful that they could not. Susannah's grief was profound. For days, she could barely function, the loss of her partner, her love, her answered prayer, almost too much to bear. But she was surrounded by her children and grandchildren, all of whom had been shaped by Knox's love and strength. They buried him on the mountain he had loved, in a spot that overlooked the valley with a view that stretched for miles. Susannah stood at the grave with her family around her, and through her tears she spoke. Knox Winston was the best man I ever knew. He was strong and kind and true. He taught me what real love looks like, patient, selfless, enduring. He gave me a life beyond anything I could have imagined, and I will be grateful for that until my last breath. Billy placed his hand on her shoulder. He loved you more than anything, Ma. That was always clear. I know, Susannah whispered, and I loved him the same way. In the months that followed, Susannah found her way through grief to a place of peace. She remained in the cabin they had shared, surrounded by memories and the family they had built together. She spent her days tending her garden, raiding and welcoming the constant stream of visitors who came to check on her. She lived for 7 more years after Knox's death, years filled with more grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren. She remained sharp and engaged, still telling stories about the early days, about the prayer and the chapel and the mountain man who had become her miracle. On a warm spring morning, Susannah woke feeling unusual fatigue. She managed to get out of bed and make her way to the porch, where she sat in the rocking chair Knox had built for her 40th birthday. The view was spectacular, the mountains green with new growth, wildflowers carpeting the meadows. Ruth, who had come to visit for the weekend, found her there an hour later. Susannah had passed peacefully, a serene expression on her face, her prayer book open in her lap to the same page she had been reading that long-ago morning in the chapel. The family gathered again on the mountain, this time to lay Susannah to rest beside Knox. Ruth, now in her 50s and a respected physician, spoke at the funeral. "My mother's life was a testament to faith and courage," she said. She went from being a desperate young woman with no hope to the beloved matriarch of a large and loving family. She taught us all what it means to trust in God's plan, even when we cannot see the way forward. And she showed us what true love looks like through her partnership with our Father. Billy added his own words. Pa used to say that Ma was his answered prayer, but I think they were answered prayers for each other. They needed each other, and God brought them together in the most unlikely way possible. Everything we are, everything we have, comes from their love and faith. They buried her beside Knox, 2 simple headstones marking the resting place of 2 people who had built an extraordinary life together. The grandchildren planted wildflowers around the graves, and Samuel carved a simple inscription into a wooden marker that he placed between the stones. Here lie Knox and Susannah Winston. In life they were united, in death they are not divided. Their love endures in all who came after. Years passed, and the Winston family continued to grow and thrive. The story of Knox and Susannah became family legend, passed down through generations. The cabin where they had lived and loved was preserved, becoming a gathering place for reunions and celebrations. And in Tucumcari, in the small wooden chapel that still stood after all these years, there was a simple plaque on the wall. It read, "In this place, a prayer was answered." In 1878, Susannah Norton came here seeking deliverance, and Knox Winston offered help. Their marriage and the family that followed stand as testimony to God's faithfulness and the power of love. May all who enter here find similar hope. The chapel became something of a pilgrimage site for Winston descendants. They would come to see the place where it all began, to sit in the same pews where their ancestors had knelt, to offer their own prayers of thanksgiving. Because Knox and Susannah's story was not just a story. It was proof that prayers are answered, sometimes in unexpected ways. It was proof that love can bloom in the most unlikely circumstances. It was proof that courage and faith can transform lives. And it was proof that sometimes, when you are at your lowest point, kneeling alone and desperate, help might walk through the door in the form of a mountain man with gentle eyes and a kind heart. A mountain man who kneels beside you and becomes your answered prayer. Their legacy lived on in the strong, loving family they had created together, in the values they had instilled in their children and grandchildren, in the love story that inspired generations to believe in miracles. Knox and Susannah Winston had started with nothing but hope and faith. They had built a life, a family, and a love that truly did endure forever. And in the hearts of all who knew their story, they would never truly die. They had found each other in a moment of divine providence, and they had made the most of every moment they were given. Their love had been tested by hardship and strengthened by trials. It had deepened with time and matured with age, and in the end, it had been everything a love should be: faithful, true, and everlasting. The mountains stood eternal, just as they had when Knox first built his cabin there. The stream still ran clear and cold beside the old homestead. And on quiet mornings, when the mist hung low in the valleys and the first light touched the peaks, you could almost imagine seeing them there. Knox and Susannah, young again, standing on the porch of their cabin looking out at the view they loved. His arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest, together as they had always been meant to be. Two souls who had recognized each other in a moment of desperate prayer and built something beautiful from that recognition. Two people who had taken a leap of faith and been rewarded beyond measure. A mountain man and the woman who had been praying alone in a chapel, brought together by the hand of God to create a love story for the ages. And though they were gone, their love remained, as permanent and enduring as the mountains themselves. A testament to faith, courage, and the miracles that can happen when you open your heart to hope. Their story would live on, inspiring others to believe in answered prayers and unexpected blessings, reminding people that sometimes the greatest love stories begin in the most unlikely ways. And that sometimes, when you are kneeling alone in the darkness, someone might kneel beside you and become the light you have been praying for. The end.